Hello from the studios of WIWU-TV on the campus of Indiana Wesleyan University. Welcome to the 2015 Third House session of the Indiana General Assembly. I'm Alan Miller, Vice Chair for Governmental Affairs for the Marion-Grant County Chamber of Commerce, and our guests today are 5 of the 7 state legislators who represent Grant County in the Indiana General Assembly. Joining the Chamber of Commerce and WIWU-TV as sponsors are Indiana Michigan Power, Via Credit Union, the Chronicle Tribune, and WBAT Radio. I'm going to briefly introduce each of the participating legislators, after which each of them will have an opportunity to present a 5-minute opening statement. First, we have Senator Amanda Banks, who is serving on an interim basis for her husband, Senator Jim Banks, who is now serving with the U.S. Navy in Afghanistan. Senator Banks represents Senate District 17. She lists her occupation as full-time wife and mother. Next to her is State Senator Jim Buck, a Republican from Kokomo. He represents Senate District 21. He has done that since 2008 and previously served in the Indiana House of Representatives from 1994 to 2008. He is a real estate broker. Beside him, the newest member of our county legislative delegation is State Representative Tony Cook, a Republican from Cicero, Indiana. He represents District 32, and he was chosen by a Republican caucus in January to succeed Eric Turner in that position. Representative Cook is a retired school administrator. Next to him, State Senator Travis Holdman, a Republican from R-Markle, Indiana. He represents Senate District 19, and he has served in that position since March of 2008. Senator Holdman is an attorney. State Representative Mike Karickhoff, a Republican from Kokomo, represents House District 30. He has done that since 2010. State Representative Karickhoff is an administrator with Ivy Tech Community College. Not participating today, the other 2 people who represent Grant County. State Representative David Wolkins is a Republican from Warsaw. He is currently on medical leave from the General Assembly after recently undergoing surgery. And finally, State Representative Kevin Mahan is a Republican from Hartford City who has a family member being deployed with the military today to Afghanistan. So Kevin is spending time with his nephew before he leaves. And with that, we are ready for our opening statements, beginning with Senator Amanda Banks.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you all for being here in person today, and thank you to the Chamber of Commerce and, of course, Indiana Wesleyan for hosting us. This is quite an experience, my second town hall meeting and the first that's televised. It's really a pleasure to be here. As Alan said, I'm serving on an interim basis while my husband is deployed in Afghanistan. For those of you interested, he is serving on a NATO base in Kabul, where he is tasked with procuring and maintaining vehicles for the Afghan National Army. So it's a bit of a different role for him from the state Senate, but he is doing well there, and we expect him back in May. During my stint in the state Senate, I am pleased to serve on the Education Committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee, Labor and Pensions Committee, and Homeland Security and Transportation Committees. I will tell you, for those of you who are unfamiliar with my biography, that I come in with a bit of experience. While not in the state legislature, I was very fortunate to work in federal legislation at Focus on the Family for 4 years prior to Jim and I starting to have children, and really enjoyed work in public policy. My degree is in policy from Indiana University. I'm a SPIA graduate. And I really enjoyed that time in public policy work. That's really where my passion lies. So stepping into this role in the state Senate has been very enjoyable. Of course, I am learning a lot and really appreciate the help of my colleagues up here and others at the State House who have been so helpful in guiding me through this process. But I was able to kind of hit the ground running in January, and I did introduce a bill on veterans issues, Senate Bill 298. And that bill, I'm pleased to say, has passed the Senate, had a unanimous vote there, and it will be considered in the House here shortly. Actually, a companion bill has already passed the House as well. Senate Bill 298 would simply allow our private employers in Indiana to adopt hiring preferences for veterans if they so chose. And this really comes out of a trend in the past couple of years. There's been 13 other states who have adopted similar policies to allow our private companies to give give those preferences to veterans because so many are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and having trouble finding work. Our post 9/11 veterans here in Indiana have an unemployment rate of nearly 17%. And so this is, I think, one policy that we can adopt here to help curb that problem and to give our veterans a leg up when they return from duty. So I'm eager to see that move through the House and hopefully become law before long. I'll also say in my work on the Education Committee, we have a lot before us. As you might imagine, as Governor Pence has said, this is an education year if it's anything but a budget year. So lots to consider there. One bill that may be of interest to you we're going to be voting on, I believe, this week is Senate Bill 500. It is a nearly 300-page bill, which is quite unusual from what I understand. But it's interesting because a group of local school districts got together, over 20 of them, and they hired a firm to go through Title 20, our education laws, and they sought to clean up that law to eliminate obsolete provisions. There's a lot of reporting requirements that are on schools and other things that are just not necessary or are just obsolete. And so they wanted to a proposal for the legislature to consider to clean up our Title 20 law, and they also made several policy recommendations, some changes there. So the committee is looking very closely at those, and we'll be voting this week. I do hope that we can move some or all of that bill through and attempt to help local school districts who have a lot of administrative burden that maybe we could help ease, and again, just have a more clean Title 20 law that's up to date. So be looking for that this next week. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to my colleague, Senator Buck.
Senator Buck.
Well, thanks, Alan, and thanks to the individuals here today. It's always a treat for legislators to get to meet with those that we serve. We see the same faces a lot of times down at the State House, but many of those people that we serve really don't have the time or can come down to see us for whatever reason. So this gives us a chance to look to you directly and let you know what we're doing and have an opportunity to hear your concerns. This is a budget year, and the budget is over in the House, but we are already trying to prepare ourselves for the agenda that the governor has set before us. As you may know, this will be the fifth or sixth budget in a row that will be a balanced budget. And so we're very pleased that Indiana is really a standard for the rest of the country. We have a working balance that is helping us get through a lot of the rough times we've all experienced in the last few years. My effort has usually been in the area of annexation issues or tax issues. I serve on 6 different committees. I chair the Commerce and Technology Committee. I sit on the Local Government Committee. I'm the ranking member on Utilities, and then I sit on the Elections and Civil Law. It's different committees this year. As many of you know, there's a 40-10 split in the Senate, and so normally we have about 7 weeks to hold hearings. But in a number of those committees, we have split them in 2 to where we only have 3.5 weeks because we're trying to accommodate the minority so they can attend all of our different meetings. And as a result, we share the same members, so we're getting to know one another a lot more frequently as a result. But I want you to know it's a privilege to serve you in the Indiana Senate. We have different issues, seems like, every year. One of the bills that's come before my committee was e-liquids. You're all familiar about e-cigarettes. That's usually 2 milligrams or less. But there's a new industry that's out there now that caters to what's called pins and vapes. Those instruments will have more than 2 milligrams and they're refillable. Right now, as Senator Yoder portrayed, it's kind of the Wild West. There's really no regulations whatsoever. But it's a means for people to wean themselves off of nicotine. But you can go into these head shops and there really are no means to make them child-proof like we do everything else. So the General Assembly is trying to address this, so at the same time being able to provide a means for those that want to wean themselves off of tobacco can do so, but yet we make it a safe product for the rest of the state. Another issue that, as I mentioned earlier, I deal with is annexation. We had a number of bills this year come before the Senate. Senator Boots, his bill is moving. I'm joining him on that bill. I'm going to merge one of my bills into his bill, trying to make it easier so we don't have a huge number of bills going over to the House. But what it boils down to, Indiana is one of the most egregious states for annexation. The remonstration process is conveyed as means to maybe defeating an annexation, but in reality, all it does is give you a ticket to the court. With this legislation, a simple majority, whether yes or no, would either defeat it or allow it to pass. The courts would be excluded, make it a much more streamlined issue. So we're hopeful that things will go there in a speedy way. Another bill is Senate Bill 100, having to do with an unfortunate circumstance that's happened in my district, where FEMA has come to believe that a baseball diamond that's being built is in violation of the green space or open space, and as a result has threatened all 92 counties with suspension of our flood mitigation grants. I'm trying to figure out a way that we can keep that from happening. Right now it's passed the Senate. It's over now into the House for first reading this Monday. There's also a lawsuit from the city filed in administrative court to try to seek relief. We don't know how it's going to end, but we do want to take a consideration that we'll have a tool. Should this ever happen again, the state won't be helpless to protect itself. So we have a varied issues that come before us. Those are just a few of the things that I'm working on, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Cook.
Good morning, and again I want to thank the Chamber as well as Indiana Wesleyan for being here this morning and getting an opportunity to air out some interest that I have to my constituencies here in Grant County for the very first time. I think probably I need to give a little more biographical information this morning, since many of you didn't get the opportunity to meet me since I was selected within the caucus process. But I have been, the past 41 years, I've been an administration and teacher. The past 25 years I was a principal at both middle school and high school levels, and then the last 12 I've been in the central administration as an assistant superintendent, and the last 8 as superintendent of schools. Retired in January of 2014. And as such, I told many audiences I feel that helped prepare me to meet the many demands of our voters and their interests. You're constantly out before small groups trying to convince of policies, hearing those issues within your community, trying to go back and promulgate policy with the school board and implement that within your school system. So it was very good practice for me, I think, before getting into the legislature. Prior to that too, I was a government and econ teacher and a coach. It makes me feel very old today. In the crowd this morning is the Marion superintendent and Brad Lindsay. I was a point guard at Westfield when I was coaching basketball at Clinton Prairie. So my age is catching up with me this morning, Brad, seeing you here. But this time in the legislature, I'm currently serving on the Education Committee, the Interstate and International Relations, as well as the Election and Apportionment Committee. It's been a very interesting session, as it is a priority in education, and we've been making the news pretty regularly with what's been turning out of the Education Committee and voting onto the House floor. However, there's a lot of other interesting things that are coming out that get bypassed with the instances occurring around the state superintendent and the Board of Instruction, and I'm sure we'll address later. And 1608 was introduced this week of Jed McMillan after it had passed our committee, and that is dealing with the structure of the superintendent and the state board. Also, we have a very interesting omnibus type bill that's coming out, 1486, that Jeff Thompson has sponsored that goes even further into some of the responsibilities and what is the expectancy of both of those bodies. So again, education is on the forefront of all of our platform. We are trying to ensure that we can have a more sound formula. I think we'll see that coming out that treats people, we hope, in a better fashion. I'm very positive about what I see with that as it's shaped in both houses. Some specific interest areas that I have are in education, agriculture, cities and towns, domestic violence, election law, children and minors, veterans, and right to life and religious freedom that I believe, again, we'll probably be discussing, and Amanda's been deeply involved with that. The agricultural situation, particularly, I've joined the Rural Caucus, and I've been watching what Dr. DeVore and others have been depicting with the tax situation with the farm, and that is an area that really needs some attention right now. I believe their tax rates have been up 47% since 2011 when they adopted a new base and a program of escalating tax coming into play for them. Again, also I have some very definite education issues. I was involved as co-author on a dyslexia bill, and I've got two bills that I'm co-authoring and authoring that to look at the way schools are able to pay and compensate their teachers. Currently I have 13 bills that I'm co-author on two. A major one is also a Tipton County project where they have the need to build a jail in their community. They've been studying it for over a year and a half, 2 years, and it's attempting to get permission to county commissioners and the city council to initiate a jail and a gadget tax within that county. And I'll also be a sponsor of a Senate Bill 251 coming over as over control projects and referendum that will be allowing the municipalities and to utilize savings monies that they have to stay under that opportunity where they would have to go to a referendum within the community over the $12 million cap. So I thank you for being here.
Thank you. Senator Holdman?
I'm Travis Holdman with Senate District 19. This is my seventh session with the legislature in the Indiana Senate. Senate District 19 encompasses quite a large geographic area, covers all of Adams and Wells counties, Blackford and all of Jay County, and then the eastern portion of Huntington and Grant County. So I used to have part of the city of Marion, but back in the last redistricting, Senator Banks took over, I think, most all of the city of Marion, and I was pushed out to the city limits, so I have everything to the east in Grant County with the exception of Van Buren Township. Pleased to be back here again, and I want to thank the Chamber and Indiana Wesleyan and Dr. Wright for hosting us here today, and we're really pleased to be here. This is an interesting session for us. It's a budget year. Every 2 years we craft and pass a balanced budget. We're looking at maintaining a healthy bank account for the state of Indiana with about a $2 billion surplus. When you take a look at what that costs the state of Indiana to function on a day-to-day basis, that's somewhere only around 50 days worth of money in the bank that we have in case we would fall on hard times. Back in 2008, when we went through the recession and the situation that we had economically in the whole country, we can pinpoint that we were spending out of state coffers right at $2 billion, roughly $2.1 billion. So that's what the recession cost us in 2008. And so we think we need to be holding back just as you would at home. You keep some money in the bank, and that's what we're attempting to do with this. But other than the fact that we'll be hopefully maintaining that $2 billion surplus, we'll be crafting a $31 billion, with a B, $1 billion state budget for the 2 years. And so Our focus, as others have said, both the governor and our leaders in both the Senate and the House have said this is going to be an education session. We're looking at maximizing funding. Everybody's come out and said, well, this is the amount of money that we're putting for funding. The governor has said he wants a couple $100 million more for education. Hopefully, we will have more than that available, but we won't know till we get to the end of session. We have our revenue forecast will come out the first week of April, and once we have that revenue forecast, then we'll put the final touches on the budget, and we'll pass the budget and everything else, and then hopefully we'll go home early in April, but we have to be done by the 29th of April by the Constitution. But I think you're going to see changes to the budget that are going to allow more for education. We've got both bills in the House and the Senate taking a look at what we're doing. I think one of the big concerns that I have, my wife is an elementary school teacher and has been for nearly 30 years. One of the issues and concerns we have, and that she talks to me about every night when I call home, has to do with the testing issue that's going on. With the length of time that it takes on I-STEP, which is absolutely ridiculous. If you've not seen those numbers, 11 or 17 hours, I can't even remember the number of hours that our students are going to be looking at testing, and we're just administering too many tests. It's time to sort of clear the deck and start all over again. And the Senate has a bill, I think it's 556 or 566, that is taking a look at revamping testing to consolidate that all into just one instrument that can be used, so that we're able to take that pressure off of kids, because no matter what parents say to kids, no matter what teachers say to kids, to try to get them to calm down, when it's time to be tested, there's just a certain amount of anxiety that kids go through. One of the other issues, and very briefly, that I just want to touch on, I also serve on the executive committee for the Commission on Improving the Status of Children in the state of Indiana. This is my second year serving on the commission. Came out of legislation that we passed 3 years ago. Worked closely with the Chief Justice, Loretta Rush, folks from DCS, Department of Child Services. We are seeing such an increase in the number of kids that are adjudicated abused and neglected, what we call CHINs, Children in Need of Services, in the state of Indiana. From 2013 from 2013 to 2014, we saw an increase of 40%, from 12,000 to 16,000 kids that are coming into our system because of abuse and neglect. We are reaching epidemic proportion in the state of Indiana. And when we talk to the folks about why we're seeing that influx, they're saying it has to do with heroin and meth are the two primary causes. We have an epidemic, folks, here in our state, and it's not only a moral issue and a family issue and a societal issue, but it's a fiscal issue. When we're taking a look at what it's costing the state of Indiana, what it's costing you as taxpayers to pay for this habit and this crime that's going on in our cities and our small towns, it's time for us to take note of it and move to action on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Karickhoff.
Thank you. Good morning. It's nice to be here. My name is Mike Karickhoff. I am a state representative in District 30, starting my third term in the General Assembly. Prior to that, I did spend 2 terms on the Kokomo Common Council, and I bring a strong municipal government background to the State House. As was mentioned, my colleague Kevin Mahan is unable to be here today, and he had a brief statement that he would like me to share with you, and if you'd indulge me, I'd just like to read that. Dear President Wallace and members of the Marion County Chamber of Commerce, please allow me to open by saying how thankful I am for the chance to come together with you all on the 7th for this year's Chamber Third House session, and how sorry I am that I must inform you I cannot attend. I've always enjoyed these meetings over the last 5 years, so it's regrettable that I now must miss my first Third House session. The circumstances are such that I simply have another option. As I'm sure you can appreciate, there are few things more important in life than family. That is why a few days ago, when I learned my nephew's military unit was being deployed, the same day that we had scheduled this year's Third House session, I knew what I had to do. My nephew is as much a son to me as my other boys with the loss of his father this past summer. I would hate for my nephew to leave without the full support of those who love him and are so proud of him and the sacrifice he is making. That being said, while I understand a letter cannot and will never speak the same as face-to-face, I would be honored if you could allow this letter to stand in my place. I ask this because I want nothing more than to convey my support and dedication to this country, its people, and its concerns. I appreciate how indispensable local government is and how important a communal voice can be. Please know that I will be in contact with Senator Banks, Holdman, and Buck about your concerns, and I will continue to do my best to represent your interest in the People's House. I would like to reiterate my apologies for being unable to join you, but I would like to thank you for your understanding. While my presence is not, my thoughts are with you all. I look forward to any and all opportunities to engage and with work alongside you in the future. I encourage you all to reach out to me and my staff at any time. God bless. And that's from Representative Kevin Mahan.
You may have your full 5 minutes, Representative.
It's difficult being the last elected official to speak. My colleagues have covered all the good material, so that would be fine. No, it's just kind of some observations. I am starting my 5th year, and I'm really glad to say I've seen a genuine change in the tenor and the demeanor of so many people in the Capitol. You know, we had the walkout 4 years ago that went on for 5 weeks. We've had very contentious issues, HJR 3, which was the marriage amendment. We had right to work. We just had some very contentious issues that have lingered on. This session, I've had so many people just in the month or so we've been down there say, you know, this is a normal session. This is a regular session. Well, for me, starting my 5th year, normal and regular was the contentiousness and the venom and the grind that was an everyday occurrence at the Capitol. So it's been very nice to have a more, while the pace is very hectic, there's civility and thoughtfulness, and I appreciate that. I do serve on the Ways and Means Committee, where this year I have been assigned the task of Budget Committee Vice Chair, and that's been an interesting process. Chairman Brown is using his vice chairman for a variety of committees to do some substantial work, and I've enjoyed that. I was finance chair for 6 years on the city council, and Senator Holdman indicated, you know, the state's budget's $31 billion. I think it's going to probably end up being a little higher than that, but at the end of the day, there's a huge difference between a $55 million or $56 million municipal budget for a year and what we tackle at the State House, because the issues are so, the scope is so much larger and the issues are so much more important to all of us. And so I've tried to take in, I've tried to learn a lot, and it's a process that will continue through you know, the balance of our time. Don't have a lot of time left to visit with you, but the other committee I serve on is Natural Resources. I was park superintendent in the city of Kokomo for 18 years and have appreciation for the environment and the outdoors, and a lot of discussion about high-fenced hunting. And that's been a very contentious issue over the past. It's been passed several times in the House, only to die in the Senate. Just in the last week or so, there had been a pending court case for the 4 or 5 operators of those facilities in the state. The court ruled in favor of the operators that they could continue. So I think the bill that's in Natural Resources now is even more important, so we can have some regulation of those high-fence hunting preserves and ensure that they're operated in a safe manner to minimize the chance of disease and ensure as much fair chase as possible. So I look forward to our discussions today and appreciate everybody that's been here. Thank you.
With that, the first question for Senator Banks. Redistricting in 2010 left Grant County with 7 state legislators, none of whom live in Grant County. This is not the time to debate the effectiveness of Grant County's legislative delegation, but I think it's time to ask if there's a better way to redistrict congressional and legislative districts in Indiana. House Bill 1003, written by the Speaker of the House and the House Minority Leader, would establish an interim study commission to discuss if changes should be made to the current system, including the establishment of a redistricting commission. My question: do you support the establishment of the commission? But more importantly, what do you think of the odds are of the current system ever being replaced by a nonpartisan redistricting
Well, I think the commission sounds like a very good idea. I think the fact that it was authored by Speaker Bosma has a lot to, lends a lot of, importance to that, and I think that we'll certainly be considering that. I, of course, haven't seen anything in the Senate yet, but I look forward to that, and I think this is a discussion that we need to have, so I'm glad that he's authored the bill.
Any of the senators wish to respond, or any of the House members, I'm sorry, Mike or Tony?
Sure, just a little historical perspective. This topic has been discussed previously in the House. I am on record as supporting the idea of independent commission studying it. There are a lot of complexities. I read in Governing Magazine where the United States Constitution requires that the state legislatures craft the boundaries for the districts. And so there's apparently some litigation, I don't know the exact number, but there are several states now that have an independent commission. And there's some litigation that is challenging those commissions, saying that the United States Constitution requires the legislature to craft the boundaries. So I think we'll see what the outcome of that litigation is, but the concept is good, and I think that you'll see something come out of the House to at least advance it to an in-depth study over a period of time.
I'm going to deviate a bit from the format and give the other two senators an opportunity. They indicated they wanted to express the, Senator Buck, you were first, and then we'll get to Senator Holdman.
Well, it's an issue. I've had the good fortune of being in the legislature 20 years, and I've seen redistricting take place a couple times. The one main point that needs to be made, Indiana has strived over the years to make our redistricting as fair and as concise as possible. As a result of that, Indiana has the 4th best redrawn districts in the country. And it was mentioned there is a constitutional issue as to what's been done. Many of the studies that we've had over many, many years have tried to make a panel that would be quote unquote nonpartisan. Those states that have these panels, no matter whether it's a judge, no matter whether it's a normal, ordinary citizen, everybody brings a bias to the district redrawings. And so to find something that's purely non-political has been difficult. And so while in the Senate we have a bill in elections that is trying to make it a constitutional issue, I have not supported that. It's not been given a vote because the chairman couldn't get a second on the bill. But nonetheless, I know it's a political hot potato in some cases, but I do want it to be known that the legislature, in conjunction with the speaker and the pro tem, have set about to try to make those districts as concise and fair as possible, and we've been rewarded with that by being noted as the 4th best in the country.
Senator Buck, the next question for you. You already raised the issue of the bills related to annexation, which is somewhere near the top of Marion's political city council mayoral agenda right now, because our mayor has proposed annexing several parcels of land around the city. If I understand correctly, the thrust of your bill and others is to bring the remonstrance process for annexation into line with the current remonstrance process for property tax statutes. My second question, the various bills, I think you had stated in your opening remarks, a simple majority in the affected areas would negate the proposed annexation. Now, some of the bills, the percentage is what, as high as 75%? Is that a moving number? Where do you think it's likely to land? I guess the best question, what are the chances of it passing?
This year there was a summer study committee on annexation, and I had the chance to testify along with many others. Nobody has opposed annexation. Annexation is a necessary process for an expanding municipality. The problem that's occurred in Indiana because of our archaic annexation laws, we're one of the few that still go through this process. And as a result, there has become more and more aggressive annexation, to the point there's thousands of acres of ground being annexed in one fell swoop that couldn't be developed in 100 years. And it places a great burden on those property owners then to have to go out in a remonstrance process and garner 65% of the property owner's signatures in order to have a ticket, if you will, to court. But the way the law is currently drafted, once that process goes to court, the judges have very few options but to grant it. And so you will find communities spending not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases over $1 million, to fight annexation, only to go to court and find out that it's pretty much a done deal once it gets there. So what we're attempting to do is bring Indiana more in line with other states and their efforts to still allow municipalities to grow, but to honor those areas that do not want to be in a municipality. Most now are annexing for two reasons. They want to become a second-class city, and they also want to raise more revenue. Most of the areas that are being annexed are areas that are already developed out. This, in essence, takes money away from some of the other taxing districts. And so now we're having another issue that's arisen, that we find that municipalities that are owning utilities are also taking from the REMCs and the investor-owned utilities their service area at a reduced price, because again, it's a done deal once they go to the RURC and ask for those assets. So I think you will see something come out of the General Assembly. I think we are more conscious that we're out of step with our property rights in the rest of the country, and we recognize Indiana's growing at the same time as our municipalities. So I think the legislation that's being proposed in both the House and the Senate are fair and reasonable bills, and I do look for something substantial to come out of the General Assembly this year.
Let me just, one follow-up question, Senator. The parcels being proposed for annexation in Grant County around Marion are not adjacent to each other. They are scattered about the perimeter of the city. One far to the south, one far to the north. When you're gathering signatures from a designated area, are we going to be looking at those collectively, or would one subdivision circulate a petition just for that subdivision?
I don't know. Ordinances control your annexation area. I don't know whether you have one ordinance, if they're contiguous with each other. I really don't know your particular issue over here. But just from your brief comments, it becomes quite obvious to most that the remonstrant process is complicated.
Anybody from the House care to comment on that? And I will limit it to one member of the House.
Senator Holdman's advice was don't touch, but I would just say, because we never take their advice. When I was on the city council, I participated in a very large annexation in Kokomo, and the circumstances of such were that there had only been voluntary annexations for over 2 decades, and it had formed kind of a patchwork of spaces in and out of the city where there were islands created. And a decision was made to bring everybody in, not all, but most, probably in excess of 90% of the properties had at one time or another signed a waiver that they would not remonstrate because they were connected to the city sewer, and they were being charged a 25% surcharge on their sewer bill. And the annexation took place. It was highly contentious. I was the councilman that offered an amendment to shrink the size of the annexation and let go of some of that farmland, like Senator Buck talked about, that these vast acres of vast expanses of acreage that really could never be developed. And we let those go. At the end of the day, the annexation did take place, and it will play out, I think, more in the next municipal election. This election this year will be the first time that those voters that are newly annexed will have an opportunity to vote. And if they were that against the annexation, I think you'll see some leadership changes. But I do agree with Senator Buck. I think something will come out of the General Assembly. I think property tax caps have put a pressure on municipal government to try and go after assessed value, and Senator Buck is also right. When that assessed value gets shifted and brought into the city, it does affect every other political subdivision proportionally, and I think something should be done and will be done. The question is, as in all things, how, to what extent and how much. And so I'll look forward to reading the Summer Study Committee's report and seeing how that's advanced.
Thank you. Representative Cook, you raised the issue surrounding the State Board of Education, State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Questions from someone in our audience: why is the legislature so eager to remove Glenda Ritz's responsibilities as chairman of the State Board of Education when 1.3 million voters placed their trust in her to do this job and not follow previous administrations?
Well, and this is an issue that I came in with wide open eyes and hadn't made up my mind where the most problem of dysfunction was between the state board or the superintendent. Be quite honestly, in my opinion, it is with the chairmanship and the superintendent. As superintendents might be sitting in the audience, and myself included, I was answerable to a board that promulgated the policies. I would bring them suggestions, initiate different types of program options or rules that we might want for a corporation. They, in the end, made those decisions and charged me to go out and carry out those plans for initiating their policy. This has been a roadblock, a stumbling block. I think we have seen unprecedented actions with walking out of meetings, with not taking questions, with not taking agenda items, and it is starting to hamper our schools. The testing situation that was alluded to here has doubled. The state board immediately that afternoon, after hearing from teachers and others, put calls into the DOE office. What has happened? Where is this going? Because they had not seen those testing changes and how the duration of time was going to be expanded. All of us, I think, have some other things we could add to that, but having seen how that works and how a chairperson can block, and remember, we're not taking away the responsibilities that she still has with DOE. We're only taking away the opportunity that she has at current, the ability to be that chairperson automatically. The board will elect that chairperson. That's been kicked around, as I had to learn historically, for some time. Since the 70s and 80s, they had a commission with then Chancellor Wells at IU, and recommendations were made at that time to restructure because of issues. So it's been an ongoing problem that they've had, and it's raised its head over time. And some of these gentlemen, I'm sure, have seen it in their length of time, even with same party leaders of DOE and governors. So I think that minor tweak and what was introduced the other day allowed that opportunity for Superintendent Ritz to mend those fences and still be elected chair. And I think that's been missed too in the conversation. She can still be elected the chair of that committee. So, and when you look at the makeup of that committee with those 11 people, which she is one of those 11, and you have 8 that are currently involved in education, 2 attorneys who also are 2 university folks. One, I'm Brad Oliver here at Indiana Wesleyan, and the president of Marion University. The others, 6, I believe, are all educators too. And it's a bipartisan committee. Only 6 can be Republican. Correct me, guys, if I've got my data points wrong. And so we've seen time and again, as I've observed it, things coming out 8-2, 9-1, concerned about agenda items, meetings being closed out early, topics being left off the agenda that really wanted to be discussed, and data to be shared so that they could see if their plan that they had put forth as policy was being implemented correctly. So there's a number of those issues out there that I don't think are portrayed very well in the media, and half the story is there. There's no question that there's personalities on both sides of the table that have gotten in the way of doing good, productive business. But it's time to get past that. It's time to elect a chair so they can get some business done and not affect the classrooms and the teachers in Indiana.
Any response from one of the senators?
I'll be glad to respond because I authored Senate Bill 1, which is some of the things we're talking about. The legislature are the chief policymakers on education in the state of Indiana. That's our job constitutionally. We are given the task of appropriating money as a stakeholder in this whole educational process. Somewhere in the neighborhood of $16 to $17 billion in the biennial budget. Nearly 54% of the state budget is allocated for educational purposes. And so we are stakeholders and we have an interest in what's going on. And to be real honest with you, we've given the state board and the superintendent 2 years basically to get their act together. And it's not been working. As Representative Cook said, we've seen lawsuits, members suing each other, members walking out of meetings, agenda items being blocked from being on the agenda, information that was embargoed, confidential information being shared with the ISTA, which was inappropriate. Just a number of issues, and it hasn't stopped. And the legislature has said it's time for there to be a change. Senate Bill 1 in its current form, and all ideas are on the table. Superintendent Ritz and I we're very friendly towards each other. We serve on the Children's Commission together. She is a fine lady, very professional. She and I are meeting on a weekly basis to try to resolve the issues between Senate Bill 1 and the department and the board to try to get things ironed out. So we have open dialogue in what we're trying to do to get this done. But Senate Bill 1 in its current form would reconstitute the board because we would take the board from 11 members to 9 members, which means that 2 members are going to go off the board. And we're changing the appointing authority status on the board as well. The governor would only have 4 appointments to the board. 2 of those would have to be educational professionals. Then there would be 4 appointments, 2 from the President Pro Tem of the Senate and 2 from the Speaker of the House. One of those would have to be, or there couldn't be more than 2 of this, or more than 1 of the same party, excuse me. So it would be 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, appointed by both the Speaker and the President Pro Tem. And so I think we would see a better mix. We would certainly see a composition of the board change, and we would push that election. There'll be an amendment offered Tuesday that's going to push that election after the board is reconstituted in July to September when the chair would actually be elected. And I would say that there is a chance that Superintendent Ritz could be reelected with that reconstituted board. But it's changing the rules. We're going to codify some of the agenda procedures to get items on the agenda because it seems that that's one of the issues they cannot get resolved for themselves. And I think there's blame to go around on both sides with the board and with the superintendent and with the department. And it's time for us to get on with what we can do to benefit our kids, to benefit our teachers, and find every resource available to make sure our kids get the best education and our teachers are treated the best they can and paid the very best and the most that we possibly can within our own means.
Senator Holdman, I'm going to come right back to you in regards to Senate Bill 127, which you both wrote and which passed the Senate on Tuesday. The bill also has support from the other legislators who represent Grant County. Senate Bill 127 would benefit religious affiliated organizations that seek state contracts. You have admitted openly that you sponsored the bill at the request of Indiana Wesleyan University, but certainly the application goes well beyond the university. Summarize specifically what the bill would do and what other religious organizations would be affected by it.
What Senate Bill 127 does is basically just say that it is illegal for you to discriminate based on EEOC, equal opportunity factors that are laid out in law. But with regard to religious organizations, there's a carve-out or an exemption that is allowed for religious organizations as long as they comply with federal law. This is like folks have treated this, and I don't mean to cast any dispersions, especially on the media folks in the room that may be here today, but the media has really run with this and I think missed the point of the whole issue. We're doing no more than what federal government has been doing since 1966. Lyndon Johnson signed an executive order that allows for this exemption or this carve-out for faith-based institutions within the EEOC. And so we're really doing no more than that. It has implications, I believe, and I'm hearing from all over the state, from religious organizations, because a number of the services, especially on the social service side, that are provided to families and children in the state of Indiana that we contract with as a state government are provided by benevolent organizations, mostly churches. I used to be the DCS director in my county, was for 11 years. Every out-of-home placement, every treatment center that we send abused and neglected children to for treatment was sponsored by and organized by a religious institution. So if we can't provide a carve-out and an exemption for those folks, then we better get ready to ramp up what it's going to cost us to pay for this as state government, to hire all those people ourselves and to raise your taxes to pay for it, because those contributions that you're giving to your church and to parachurch organizations are the ones who are footing a substantial portion of that bill currently because they feel that's a godly thing and they're called to do that. So the bill really does nothing more than what the federal government has been doing for 40 or 50 years. But I think it's just been grossly misunderstood as to what we're trying to accomplish here.
Thank you. Any follow-up by Representative Cook or Karickhoff?
I think Senator Holdman explained the purpose of the bill very well, and I know Representative Mahan is carrying it in the House, and I'll look forward to learning more about it. But it's certainly, it's not created the same firestorm as some of the other legislation, but it has certainly piqued a lot of people's interest. But after hearing the explanation today, it really does make perfect sense, because if suddenly all these organizations that are currently contracting with the state to provide services are unable to do so, that's an issue that we all need to consider. And as a person that tries to, keep track of our balanced books, I think that could present a real issue. So there are probably some financial issues to consider as well.
Back to Senator Banks. A couple of questions, one general, one specific. Both of these come from Brad Lindsay, the superintendent of the Marion Community Schools. The general question: how will legislators continue to be sensitive to the funding needs of districts such as Marion, in which 8 of 10 students live in poverty? The more specific question: under the proposed A to F accountability system growth model, the calculation of a student's growth points is affected by his or her performance status. This marginalizes low-performing students, students of poverty, students of special needs, and is contrary to the original intent of the accountability model. How is this model equitable to all children?
Well, as far as the accountability model A through F, I know that is being looked at, and we are considering some possible tweaks to that. And I don't know the bill number off the top of my head that would address that, but I know that that's an ongoing discussion and something that I think legislators are sensitive to needing to reevaluate as time goes on. And then the initial question, the general?
Just in general, how will legislators continue to be sensitive to the funding needs of students? high poverty levels?
Well, so I think you're talking about the funding formula, and again, we are looking at that this year. I have not seen the legislation through Education Committee yet, but I believe that's coming. Perhaps the House is looking at that first. I'm not sure if my colleagues can speak to that, but again, it's not set in stone, and I know that we're looking at possible ways to make that more equitable going forward.
Comment
from either of the House members?
Briefly, I can expand a little bit on the funding formula. You know, we have to kind of have a historical perspective. We recognize that when sales tax went up by a penny and property tax caps were put in play, really the entire operational expenses of our school corporations came to the General Assembly and went off a property tax, and local school boards really just have kind of three silos of money, one for transportation operation, one for bus replacement, and one for capital projects and debt service. There are some corporations that still have some debt service on teacher pensions, so I guess there really are probably four. But all the other expenses, the utility expenses, the teacher salaries, the supplies, all comes from the formula that is based on the head count of the child. Probably the biggest variable in the funding formula is what's called the complexity index. And that is 50% of the foundation. We're just going to use numbers here that are pretty easy to understand for purposes of illustration. If you have $4,000 for the foundation, if your student is on free and reduced price lunch, they get 50% more. They get $6,000 for that student. So they get 50% more. If the foundation goes up to $5,000, the next year, the complexity index is 2,500, and they now get $7,500 for that student. The gap continues to increase for students of poverty year over year over year. And that complexity formula has been in play for 6 or 7 years now. And nobody disputes, nobody argues that children of poverty are more expensive to educate. No one disputes that. But because of the way the formula and complexity was always calculated, the gap has become too large. And so the solution that's being proposed is to raise the foundation for everybody. So children of poverty and other children as well all receive a pretty substantial increase in the foundation, and the complexity no longer be given a proportional rate, that it be provided with kind of like we call them categoricals. There's a categorical for various grades of handicapped students. There's a categorical for honor students, a categorical for just a wide variety of kind of special needs in our schools. So you have these series of categoricals, and complexity would be treated as a categorical. I think the House is in its 25th or 26th run of doing calculations and looking at the individual effects on corporations. The fact is, when money follows the child, you have to have enrollment that is steady or increasing. And if you have fewer students in your school corporation, your budget's not going to grow. And when the state of Indiana has 1.1 million K-12 students, and your K-12 student population decreases statewide, guess what? There's going to be a shrinkage, there's going to be a reduction in some schools. As we see urban growth and rural areas decline, if you look at the census tract data for, quite frankly, counties like Grant, Howard, Tipton, Carroll, Clinton, you know, these rural counties are shrinking in population. So our rural schools have been particularly hard hit by the funding formula and how it's been applied. And so what the legislature is trying to do is pour more money into the foundation and manage complexity in a way that provides fairness and the ability to educate our students. And whether it's $200 million or $300 million, I know that the Speaker has very publicly stated multiple times that we're going to do better than the governor's bill when it comes to K-12 funding. And judging on the numbers that we've looked at so far, I can tell you that that's true.
Thank you so much to each of our 5 state legislators. Thanks for your service to the state of Indiana, specifically to the people of Grant and surrounding counties. Good to have you on our campus this morning.
Thank you.
God bless you. Thank you.
It's so quiet down here. that if you listen very carefully, you can hear your stress fade away. Visit Indiana.com